The first thing anyone noticed was the silence. The grand ballroom of the Astoria, a cavernous space usually buzzing with the self-congratulatory chatter of New York's philanthropic elite, had fallen completely, utterly quiet. It was a heavy silence, thick with shock and disbelief. 1,000 phones, previously tucked away in $1,000 purses and the pockets of bespoke tuxedos, were now held aloft, their small blue screens a constellation of captured astonishment. The object of their focus stood on the grand, spotlit stage, Elias Vance, the tech world phantom, the self-made titan whose net worth was whispered to be north of $5 billion, a man so reclusive he made Howard Hughes look like a game show host. He was supposed to be in Dubai, or on his private island, or quite possibly on Mars. He was not supposed to be here, at the Global Health Initiative's annual Heart of Gold Gala. And he was certainly not supposed to be on one knee. Before him stood a woman. Not a socialite, not an actress, not a fellow billionaire's daughter. Her name was Adama Diop, and an hour ago, no one in this room had known she existed. She wasn't wearing Dior or Versace. She wore a gown of shimmering gold kente cloth, a river of molten sunlight that fell to the floor in graceful folds. It was a dress that spoke not of price tags, but of heritage, of pride, of a sun-drenched land far from this air-conditioned palace of crystal and steel. Her face was a beautiful mystery, her expression not one of triumphant glee, but of a profound, earth-shaking calm. In the center of the room, at table 17, a woman named Isabel felt the blood drain from her face. Her meticulously applied foundation couldn't hide the gray pallor that crept into her skin. Her hand, clutching a champagne flute, began to tremble. Beside her, her husband Malik looked as if he had seen a ghost. A beautiful, golden, multi-billion-dollar ghost from a life he had thrown away like garbage. Isabel's mind was a screeching, panicked reel of images. Adama, in her cheap nurse's scrubs. Adama with her quiet, accented English. Adama being assigned the difficult, silent patient in room 302, the one they called the broken mule. Isabel remembered her own words, spat like poison in the staff locker room. Perfect. The donkey gets the broken mule. Don't expect a tip. The donkey and the broken mule. Now the broken mule was Elias Vance, and he was offering the donkey the entire world on a velvet cushion, holding a diamond that glittered with the fire of a captured star. The room began to spin. The silence was finally broken by a single, sharp sound, the clatter of Isabel's champagne flute shattering on the marble floor. On stage, Elias Vance ignored the commotion. He looked only at Adama, his voice, amplified by the microphone but somehow intimate, reaching every corner of the silent hall. My father told me that a woman's character is not in her words when you are powerful, but in her hands when you are weak, he said, his voice thick with an emotion that felt impossibly raw, impossibly real. Adama, your hands didn't just push my chair, they rebuilt my world. This award is nothing, a piece of glass. I want to offer you my whole life. Will you marry me? Her answer was not a shout, but a whisper that the microphone caught like a prayer. Yes. The room didn't just applaud, it exploded. A tidal wave of sound, of release, of witnessing a fairy tale they never knew they were in. If you love stories where kindness is rewarded beyond measure, and character is revealed to be the only true currency, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. Because the love in this story is built on something money can never, ever buy. And the journey to this moment on this stage, well, it was longer and harder than anyone in that glittering room could ever imagine. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. 6 months earlier, Adama Diop's world was not a grand ballroom. It was a fourth-floor walk-up in the Bronx. Her alarm went off at 4:30 a.m., a shrill, insistent beep that she never snoozed. To snooze was a luxury, and luxuries were not part of her budget. Her budget, calculated down to the last penny, was a testament to her discipline and her purpose. It was a simple ledger of survival and sacrifice. Rent, $1,450 for a room that was more of a closet with a window. Utilities, $120. MetroCard, $127. Groceries, $200. A miracle of couponing and sticking to lentils, rice, and whatever vegetables were on sale. And the most important line item, the one that made all the others bearable. MoneyGram transfer to Dakar, Senegal, $800. That $800 was for her mother's medication, her youngest brother's school fees, and the leaky roof on the family home. That $800 was her reason for being. Adama, at 34, moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who had learned not to waste a single motion. She worked 2 jobs. Her main job was as a private caregiver for an elderly woman in a rent-controlled apartment on the Upper West Side. It was a job of patience and gentleness, of bathing and feeding and reading aloud from books whose endings she already knew by heart. Her second job was a patchwork of agency shifts, filling in for other caregivers at facilities all over the city. It meant long train rides, unfamiliar routines, and the constant stress of making a good impression in a few short hours. Sleep was a commodity she traded for dollars. Her body was a map of her labor. Her feet ached constantly. Her lower back was a knot of perpetual tension. Her hands, though meticulously clean, were dry and calloused from a decade of service to others. They were strong hands, capable hands. They were the hands that had once held her own babies. 2 sons lost to a fever in a village clinic that had no medicine. A grief so profound it had settled deep in her bones. A quiet companion to her every waking moment. They were the hands that her ex-husband Malik had once mocked. Malik. The memory of him was a scar that sometimes itched. They had come to America together, full of dreams that glittered as brightly as the Manhattan skyline. But the city had changed him, or perhaps revealed him. It had hollowed him out, replacing his warmth with a cold, sharp ambition. He started to see Adama not as his partner, but as an anchor. Her accent was too thick. Her clothes were too simple. Her heart, which still yearned for the slow rhythms of their homeland, was too African. He said she was embarrassing him in front of his new, important friends. The final argument had been about her hands. She had been a seamstress back home, her fingers dancing with thread, creating intricate patterns on bolts of fabric. She had tried to start a small business from their apartment, but Malik had scoffed. "Look at these hands," he'd said, holding one of hers up with disgust. "They are the hands of a peasant. Rough, good for scrubbing floors and carrying burdens. You are a donkey, Adama, a beast of burden. I need a gazelle." He left her for his gazelle, a woman named Isabel, who worked as a client relations manager at a high-end cosmetic surgery clinic. Isabel was sleek, polished, and spoke with a practiced mid-Atlantic accent that sanded off all the edges of her own background. Malik took everything. The small savings they had accumulated, the car, even the good cooking pots. He left Adama with 2 suitcases, a broken heart, and his final cutting words ringing in her ears. A donkey, good for carrying burdens. For a month, Adama had nearly broken. She cried until her eyes were raw. She stared at the ceiling of her friend's couch, feeling the weight of his words pressing down on her, suffocating her. But then, one morning, she had a vivid dream of her mother. In the dream, her mother was sitting under a baobab tree, weaving a basket. She looked up at Adama and said, in their native Wolof, "The hand that gives is the hand that gathers." Adama woke up with the words echoing in her spirit. She washed her face, braided her hair, and got up. She would not be a victim. She was a Diop. She was the daughter of a woman who could make something beautiful and strong out of simple reeds. She would work, she would give, and she would trust that somehow she would gather. She found the caregiver job and then the agency work. She rebuilt her life, not with glitter and noise, but with the quiet, steady bricks of dignity and hard work. She sent the money home. She kept her small apartment spotless. She spoke to her mother every Sunday. She was lonely, but she was not alone. She had her purpose. Far across town, in a penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, a man named Elias Vance was also feeling alone. But his loneliness was of a different, more gilded kind. At 38, Elias had accomplished everything he'd ever set out to do. His software company, which he'd started in a garage with two friends, now powered half the world's financial transactions. His net worth, a figure that fluctuated with the market but always remained stratospheric, was $5.3 billion. He had homes in 7 countries, a collection of rare cars, and a staff to cater to his every whim. He had everything, except the one thing he wanted most: someone to trust. His last relationship had ended in a spectacular inferno of litigation and betrayal. Chloe had been perfect, beautiful, intelligent, from a good family. She had loved him, she'd said, for his mind, for his heart, not for his money. She'd signed the prenuptial agreement with a laugh, calling it a silly formality. 2 years later, when he gently ended the relationship after realizing they wanted different things, her team of lawyers had descended like vultures, trying to pick apart that silly formality with a ferocity that stunned him. They had argued emotional distress and claimed she had been instrumental in business decisions she had barely understood. It was a naked, shameless money grab. He had won in court, but he had lost something far more valuable: his faith. The experience had left him cynical and deeply wary. Women now seemed to see him as a walking, talking bank vault. He could see the calculation in their eyes, the way they looked at his watch before they looked at his face. He was drowning in a sea of superficiality. His father, a wise and gentle man who had been a history professor in Accra before immigrating to America, had seen the change in his son. Shortly before he passed away from a sudden illness, he had taken Elias's hand. "My son," he'd said, his voice weak but clear. "This money, it is a wall. It stops you from seeing what is real. If you want to find a woman of true worth, you must become a man of no worth. A woman's character is not in her words when you are powerful, but in her hands when you are weak. Remember that." The words had haunted Elias. A woman's hands when you are weak. After months of rattling around his empty penthouse, he devised a plan. A radical, insane plan. He would erase Elias Vance. He would become someone else. Someone weak. Someone broken. He would check into a place full of people at their most vulnerable. A place where money could buy comfort, but not character. He chose Serenity Hills Rehabilitation Center, a luxurious facility in upstate New York that catered to the wealthy, but also had a few discreet, long-term residents. With the help of his most trusted friend and COO, David, he created a new identity: Elias Mensah. A former architect who had lost the use of his legs in a devastating car accident that had also wiped out his savings. He would be quiet, withdrawn, independent. David booked him into a standard room under the new name, paying for a 6-month stay up front and leaving strict instructions that Mr. Mensah had no family and preferred minimal interaction. Elias practiced for weeks, learning to live in the wheelchair, learning to adopt the posture of a man defeated by life. He let his beard grow scruffy. He swapped his bespoke suits for worn-out sweatpants and faded t-shirts. He was shedding his billion-dollar skin, hoping to find something real underneath. He was terrified, and for the first time in a long time, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt since he was a young man with nothing but a dream. Hope. He was about to stage the most important test of his life. He wasn't looking for a wife. He was just looking for a reason to believe again. Adama got the call from her agency on a Tuesday morning. "We have a last-minute shift, Adama. Serenity Hills. It's a 3-week placement, maybe longer. The pay is good. Can you be there by noon?" Serenity Hills. Adama had heard of it. It was a place for the rich, a country club that masqueraded as a medical facility. It wasn't her usual environment, but 3 weeks of steady pay was a blessing she couldn't refuse. She packed a small bag, her uniform crisp and clean, and took the 2-hour train ride upstate. The facility was breathtaking. Manicured lawns rolled down to a shimmering lake. The main building looked like a grand hotel, with a marble lobby and a soothing fountain. The air smelled of money and disinfectant. Adama felt a familiar pang of being an outsider, a servant in a palace. She reported to the nursing station, where the head nurse, a brisk woman named Carol, handed her a file. "You'll be covering for Sarah, who's on emergency leave. Your primary assignment is Mr. Mensah in room 302. As Adama took the file, another woman leaned against the counter, filing her nails. It was Isabel. Adama's stomach dropped. She hadn't seen Isabel in the 3 years since Malik had left, but she recognized her instantly. The same sleek black hair, the same condescending smile that was 40% real and 60% cosmetic dentistry. Isabel looked up, her eyes scanning Adama's simple uniform, her worn but clean sneakers. A flicker of recognition, followed by a sneer. "Well, well. Look what the cat dragged in," Isabel said, her voice loud enough for the other nurses to hear. "Adama, isn't it? Still playing the saintly caregiver?" Adama felt a hot flush of shame creep up her neck, but she kept her face placid. "Hello, Isabel. I am just here to work." Isabel laughed, a sharp, unpleasant sound. "I heard. You got Mr. Mensah. Good luck with that." She lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper that was intentionally audible. "He's a real treat. Hasn't said more than 2 words since he got here. Just sits and stares at the wall. We call him the broken mule." She looked Adama up and down, a cruel glint in her eye. "Perfect," she said, tapping her freshly manicured nails on the counter. "The donkey gets the broken mule. Don't expect a tip. They say he's got no money left." The other nurses shuffled uncomfortably. Adama felt the sting of the old insult, sharp and sudden. A donkey. A beast of burden. For a moment, she wanted to turn and walk out, but then she remembered her mother's voice in her dream. "The hand that gives is the hand that gathers." She was not here for Isabel. She was here to do a job. She gave Isabel a small, polite nod, clutched the file, and walked down the polished hallway toward room 302. She was just here to work, but fate, as it often does, had other plans. She was about to meet the man who would change everything, but it didn't feel like a life-changing moment at the time. It just felt like another door, another patient, another burden to carry with as much grace as she could muster. Elias, sitting in his wheelchair by the window, heard the soft knock on his door. He had been at Serenity Hills for 2 weeks, and his experiment was proving to be a depressing failure. The staff treated him with a cloying, professional pity that grated on his nerves. They spoke to him too loudly, as if his legs being broken meant his ears and brain were too. They did their jobs, but there was no warmth, no genuine human connection. They saw his shabby sweatpants and his silence, and they wrote him off. They were efficient, but they were empty. He was beginning to think his father was wrong, that genuine kindness was a myth, a fairy tale for children. The door opened, and a woman in a simple blue uniform walked in. She was not what he expected. There was a quiet dignity in her posture, a calmness in her dark, intelligent eyes. She wasn't smiling a fake, bright smile. She just looked at him, directly and respectfully. "Good afternoon, Mr. Mensah," she said, her voice soft, with a beautiful, melodic accent he couldn't quite place. "My name is Adama. I will be your caregiver for the next few weeks." He simply grunted in response, part of his character, and turned back to the window. He expected her to start chattering, to fill the silence with the same inane questions he'd been enduring. "Are we comfortable? Do we need anything? Isn't it a lovely day?" But she didn't. She moved around the room with a quiet grace, tidying the small collection of books he hadn't read, straightening the blanket on his bed. Her movements were economical and purposeful. Then she pulled a small stool over near the window, but not too close. She sat down, her hands resting in her lap. "The birds are very busy today," she said, her voice calm and conversational, as if speaking to an equal, not a patient. "In my home village, we say that when the weaver birds are building so many nests, it means a long and gentle rainy season is coming." She didn't ask him a question. She didn't demand a response. She just shared an observation, a small piece of herself. Elias remained silent, but he was listening. For the first time, someone was speaking to him, not at him. This became their pattern. Adama was a presence, not a pest. She would attend to his physical needs with a gentle professionalism that never felt clinical. She would help him with his exercises, her touch firm but kind. And in the long, quiet hours in between, she would talk. Not about him, but about the world. She told him about the market in Dakar, the vibrant colors of the fabrics, the smell of grilled fish and spices. She told him about her mother's garden, how she could grow anything from a single seed. She spoke of her life not as a tragedy, but as a tapestry, full of bright threads and dark ones, all woven together. Elias remained mostly silent, offering only nods or single-word answers. It was the ultimate test. He gave her nothing back. No encouragement, no gratitude, no hint of a wealthy man playing a game. He was just a broken, silent man in a chair. And yet, she kept showing up, not just physically, but emotionally. She never treated him like a burden. She treated him like a person who was simply quiet. He saw the way the other staff, especially Isabel, treated her. He saw the condescending remarks, the eye rolls behind her back. Isabel would swan into his room, ostensibly to check on him, but really to make a show of her authority. "Adama, did you remember to chart his fluid intake? Don't forget, he's a high-risk case," she'd say, her voice dripping with false concern that was really a jab at Adama's competence. Adama would just nod calmly. Yes, Isabel, it is all charted. She never took the bait, never rose to the cruelty. Her dignity was a shield that insults seemed to slide right off of. Elias watched it all, his respect for her growing with each passing day. The real test came on a sweltering Thursday in July. It was part of Elias's plan, orchestrated with a single coded text to David. Mr. Mensah had a crucial physiotherapy appointment in the facility's state-of-the-art hydrotherapy center, located in a separate building at the far end of the sprawling campus. It was a good half-mile walk. As Adama was preparing to take him, the head nurse, Carol, came to the room with a flustered expression. "I'm so sorry, Adama," she said. "The electric wheelchair for Mr. Mensah has malfunctioned. The motor is completely dead, and all the other electrics are in use. I don't know how you'll get him to his appointment." Isabel, who had followed Carol, chimed in with a smirk. "Well, that's a problem. He'll have to cancel. It's nearly 100 degrees out there. It would take an ox to push that heavy old manual chair all the way to the therapy wing." She looked pointedly at Adama. An ox, a beast of burden. Adama looked at the standard, heavy-duty manual wheelchair in the corner. She looked at the sun beating down outside the window. She looked at Elias, whose face was a mask of impassive waiting. She didn't sigh. She didn't complain. She didn't even seem to register Isabel's insult. She simply smiled a small, reassuring smile at Elias. "It is no problem," she said, her voice even and calm. "We will walk." "Well," she corrected herself, with a tiny twinkle in her eye. "I will walk. You will roll. A little sun is good for the spirit." Isabel scoffed and walked away, shaking her head in theatrical disbelief. Carol looked relieved to have the problem solved. Adama helped Elias transfer into the manual chair. It was heavier and more cumbersome than the electric one, but she positioned him comfortably, placed a light blanket over his legs, and handed him a bottle of water. "Ready for our adventure, Mr. Mensah?" she asked. He gave a slight nod. The journey was an odyssey in miniature. The paved path wound through meticulously landscaped gardens, past rose bushes and fountains. But there was no shade, and the sun was relentless. The path, which looked flat, had gentle, almost imperceptible inclines that felt like mountains when pushing 200 pounds of man and 50 pounds of steel. Within 10 minutes, beads of sweat were trickling down Adama's temples. Her blue uniform began to show dark patches of perspiration at her back and under her arms. The rubber grips of the wheelchair handles grew slick in her palms. Elias sat in silence, every part of him an antenna, absorbing the moment. He was a man who analyzed data for a living, and he was analyzing this. He heard her breathing, how it deepened with the effort but never became a gasp or a pant of complaint. He watched her hands, strong and steady on the handles. He felt the rhythm of her push, consistent and determined. Any other person would have complained. They would have sighed or muttered about the heat or commented on the weight of the chair. They would have made sure he knew what a great effort they were expending on his behalf. Adama did none of these things. Instead, she pointed things out. "Oh, look, Mr. Mensah," she said, pausing for a moment, not to catch her breath, but to gesture toward a flurry of yellow butterflies. "They look like floating flowers." A little further on, she stopped by a large oak tree and pointed up. "A robin's nest. The babies should be hatching soon. We will have to check on them on our way back." She was not just moving him from point A to point B. She was sharing the journey with him. Halfway there, she began to hum. It was a low, sweet melody, a simple tune that seemed to rise and fall with the rhythm of her steps. The sound was incredibly soothing, a thread of gentle humanity in the oppressive heat. She was soaked in sweat now, her face flushed with the heat and exertion. But there was no anger in her, no resentment, only a quiet, focused determination. Elias felt something inside him begin to crack. It was the wall he had built around his heart, the thick, cynical armor of his wealth and disappointment. Each steady push of the wheelchair was a blow against it. Each drop of her sweat was like acid on his cynicism. This woman, who was paid a pittance, who was mocked by her colleagues, who was pushing a silent, broken man under a brutal sun, was showing more character, more grace, more simple, unadorned goodness than anyone he had ever met. She wasn't doing it for a tip. She believed he had no money. She wasn't doing it for praise. He had offered none. She was doing it because it was her job, and because she was a fundamentally decent human being. She was doing it because she had a soul that had not been corrupted by the world's casual cruelty. They finally reached a large, sprawling tree near the therapy building, its branches offering a wide circle of cool shade. Adama gently guided the chair under its canopy and set the brake. "Here," she said, her voice a little breathless but still cheerful. "Let us rest for a moment before we go inside. The cool air will feel even better after the heat." She wiped her brow with the back of her hand and took a long drink from her own water bottle. Elias watched her, and the crack inside him splintered, then shattered. This was it. This was the moment his father had told him about. A woman's hands when you are weak. He cleared his throat, which felt tight and rusty from disuse. He had to speak. He had to know. "Why?" he asked. His voice was a hoarse whisper. Adama started, surprised. She looked at him, her eyes wide. It was the first time he had initiated a conversation. "Why what, Mr. Mensah?" "Why are you so kind?" he managed to say, the words feeling foreign in his mouth. "You don't complain, you just do it." Adama considered his question for a moment. She looked at her own hands, then back at him. Her answer was simple, direct, and utterly profound. "It is my job," she said softly. "But also, everyone deserves kindness. My mother always taught me that a person's body can be broken, but that does not mean their spirit is. The spirit must always be treated with respect." She paused, then added, "And complaining does not make the chair lighter or the sun less hot. It only makes the heart heavier. So why carry two burdens when one is enough? Why carry two burdens when one is enough?" The simple logic of it, the sheer, unassailable wisdom, hit Elias with the force of a physical blow. He felt a burning sensation behind his eyes. He, a billionaire who could solve the most complex logistical problems, had never understood something so simple and so true. He had been carrying the burden of his wealth and the burden of his cynicism for years. "Tell me about you," he said, his voice stronger now. "Where is your home?" So she told him. She told him about her village, about the red dust and the mango trees. She told him about her lost sons, her voice thick with a sorrow that was old but still present, speaking of it not for pity, but as a simple fact of her life story. She even told him about Malik, about his cruel words. "He said I was a donkey," she said, a sad, small smile on her lips. "Only good for carrying burdens. For a long time I believed him. But a donkey is a strong animal, a loyal animal. It helps people get where they need to go. Maybe being a donkey is not such a bad thing." As she spoke, she opened a small, insulated lunch bag. Inside was a container of jollof rice and a piece of grilled fish wrapped in foil. The aroma was rich and savory. His own lunch would be the bland, institutional food from the Serenity Hills kitchen. "You must be hungry," she said, noticing his gaze. "Would you like to share? It is not much, but there is enough for two." And so it happened. Under the shade of a large tree, Elias Vance, the $5.3 billion man, ate from a plastic container with a plastic fork, sharing a humble lunch with a caregiver who earned less in a year than he spent on watch maintenance. He ate the rice, seasoned with spices he couldn't name, but that tasted of home, of authenticity, of a life lived far from boardrooms and stock portfolios. He ate the fish, and it was the most delicious meal he had ever had. He looked at her, this woman with her quiet strength and her profound kindness, and the dam inside him finally broke. He didn't sob or wail. It was a quiet, shattering collapse. A single tear escaped his eye, then another and another. They traced paths through the stubble on his cheeks and dripped onto his faded t-shirt. He was crying for his lost faith. He was crying for the years he had wasted in suspicion and solitude. He was crying because he had finally found something real, something money could not buy, and cynicism could not tarnish. He was crying from the sheer, overwhelming relief of being in the presence of unadorned human goodness. Adama saw his tears. She instantly misunderstood their source, assuming they were for his lost life, his broken body, the pain he kept locked inside. Her heart went out to him. She didn't say, "Don't cry," or "It's going to be okay." She reached out and placed her warm, slightly calloused hand on his shoulder. It was a simple, maternal gesture of comfort. "It is all right," she whispered, her voice full of a compassion that asked for nothing in return. Tears washed the heart. Her touch was not pitying. It was a gesture of solidarity, of one human spirit acknowledging the pain of another. And for Elias, that simple touch was everything. It was the confirmation, the validation, the period at the end of the sentence. In that moment, he knew. He wasn't just testing the world anymore. He was falling in love. Their bond deepened in the weeks that followed. The physiotherapy appointment became a turning point. Elias began to talk more, asking Adama questions about her life, her dreams. He learned that she still dreamed of being a designer, that she sketched patterns on napkins during her break times, designs that blended traditional African aesthetics with modern silhouettes. She showed them to him, hesitantly, and he saw not amateur doodles, but a raw, undeniable talent. He, in turn, began to open up, sharing a carefully edited version of his own story, the loss of his parents, the feeling of being adrift. He spoke of Eli, the architect, as a man who had lost his purpose along with the use of his legs. Adama listened with an empathy that was a balm to his soul. Their time together became the anchor of his day. He looked forward to the sound of her soft footsteps, the smell of the herbal tea she sometimes brought him from home, the quiet companionship that filled his sterile room with a warmth it had never known. He saw her fend off Isabel's daily microaggressions with that same unshakable calm. He saw her share her lunch with a janitor whose own had been forgotten at home. He saw her stay 15 minutes late, unpaid, to read one more chapter to another patient who was feeling lonely. She was consistently, authentically, and quietly good. The day of his discharge arrived. It was a moment Elias both dreaded and eagerly anticipated. David had arranged everything. A social worker informed the staff that Mr. Mensah's modest disability settlement had finally come through, and he would be moving to a small, accessible apartment in the city. Adama helped him pack his few belongings, the worn sweatpants, the secondhand books. There was a genuine sadness in her eyes. "I will miss our talks, Mr. Mensah," she said, her voice soft. "Call me Eli," he said, smiling, "and I will miss them too, more than you know." He felt a surge of panic. What if this was it? What if she walked out of his life and he could never find her again? He had to act. Adama, he said, his heart pounding. I know it's forward, but my friend is picking me up. We're going to a small cafe in town to celebrate my freedom. Would you join us? After your shift? My treat. As a proper thank you. Adama hesitated for a second. It was unconventional, but the connection she felt with this quiet, sad man was real. She had come to see him as a friend. I would like that very much, Eli, she said, a warm smile spreading across her face. That evening, Adama finished her shift, changed out of her uniform into a simple but elegant wrap dress she had made herself, and walked to the designated cafe in the small town near the facility. She felt a little nervous, a little excited. She sat at an outdoor table and waited. At exactly 6 p.m., a car pulled up to the curb. But it wasn't the beat-up sedan she had been expecting. It was a black Mercedes Maybach S680, a car so long and so silent, it seemed to absorb the sound of the street around it. The finish was like polished obsidian. Adama stared, confused. She assumed it was for someone else, perhaps a celebrity staying at the nearby luxury inn. The back door was opened by a man in a sharp, dark suit. This was David, Elias's fiercely loyal COO, but Adama just saw an imposing professional driver. She watched, expecting a dignitary to emerge. Instead, a man stepped out of the car, and he stood up. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a presence that seemed to command the very air around him. He was wearing a dark, perfectly tailored suit that probably cost more than her apartment's annual rent. His beard was gone, replaced by a clean-shaven jaw. His hair was neatly cut. He was handsome, powerfully so, but it was his eyes that she recognized. They were the same intelligent, soulful eyes that had watched her from the wheelchair. It was Eli, but it wasn't. He walked toward her, his stride confident and sure. Adama's mind reeled. She felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. Was this a dream? A cruel joke? He stopped in front of her table. Adama, he said, his voice the same, yet different, infused with a new power, a new resonance. Eli? She whispered, her voice barely audible. But your legs, you're walking. He gave a sad, wry smile. My legs have always worked, Adama. It was my heart that was crippled. And then he told her everything. He told her about Elias Vance, the billionaire who had everything and nothing. He told her about Chloe, the betrayal, the crushing cynicism that had followed. He told her about his father's last words, the desperate, crazy plan to find someone real in a world that felt entirely fake. I had to know, he explained, his eyes pleading with her to understand. I had to know if a person could see past the brokenness, past the poverty, and just see a man. I wasn't looking for a caregiver, Adama. I was looking for a reason to believe in people again. And you became that reason. Adama sat in stunned silence, trying to process the enormity of it all. The silent man in room 302, the broken mule, a billionaire. It felt like a story from a book, not her life. She felt a flash of anger, of being deceived. But then she looked into his eyes and saw not the arrogance of a rich man playing games, but the profound vulnerability of a man who had been deeply hurt. She saw the truth of his loneliness. Why me? She finally asked, the question a breath of disbelief. What did I do? Elias reached across the table and gently took her hand, her strong, capable caregiver's hand. "Why you?" he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "Because of 1,000 small things that added up to one big, undeniable truth. Because you spoke to me about weaver birds when I refused to speak to you at all. Because you saw my dignity when I was doing everything in my power to hide it. Because you faced cruelty every day and answered it with grace. Because you pushed that ridiculous, heavy wheelchair in the blazing sun and you never once complained. You hummed." He paused, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. "You shared your lunch with me, Adama. You had so little, and you offered to share it. You have no idea what that meant to a man who has been surrounded by people who have everything and will share nothing." The dam of Adama's composure finally broke. She began to cry. Not the quiet, dignified tears of sorrow she had shed for her past. These were tears of overwhelming, cathartic release. She was crying because for the first time since Malik had called her a donkey, someone had seen her not as a beast of burden, but as a source of strength. She was crying because her simple, everyday acts of kindness, the things she did without thinking, had been seen, truly seen, and valued. She was crying because this powerful, incredible man was telling her that her character, the very essence of who she was, had healed him. He hadn't fallen for a pretty face or a clever line. He had fallen for her soul. Elias moved to the chair beside her and wrapped his arms around her as she wept. "It's okay," he whispered, echoing the words she had once said to him. Tears washed the heart. He held her, this extraordinary woman, and knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that his search was over. He had found his reason to believe, and he would spend the rest of his life making sure she knew the incredible value of the gift she had so freely given him. The next 2 months were a whirlwind, a beautiful, dizzying dream from which Adama never wanted to wake. Elias was true to his word. He didn't just shower her with gifts, he showered her with respect. He listened to her, he valued her opinions, he encouraged her dreams. He saw the sketches she had doodled on napkins and immediately hired a team to help her create a business plan, securing the finest silks and cottons from across Africa. He named the budding fashion line Diop, insisting her name and her vision be at the forefront. But more important than the money were the quiet moments. They explored the city together, not the glitzy, high-end version Elias knew, but Adama's New York. They ate at small, family-owned Senegalese restaurants in Harlem, where Adama would proudly introduce him to the owners. They rode the subway. They sat on a bench in a small park in the Bronx, sharing a simple coffee, and it felt more intimate and real to Elias than any 5-star dinner he'd ever had. He was not just showing her his world, he was joyfully entering hers. He met her mother via video call, speaking to her respectfully in the few words of Wolof Adama had taught him. Her mother, with the profound wisdom of an elder, looked at him through the screen and simply said to Adama, "His eyes are kind. He sees the real you." One evening, Elias was scrolling through his emails when he saw the invitation for the Heart of Gold Gala. He was one of the event's biggest anonymous benefactors. An idea, audacious and perfect, began to form in his mind. He saw a path not to revenge, but to a perfect, poetic justice. A way to honor Adama on a stage she deserved, and to finally close the painful chapter of her past. He made a few quiet phone calls. He nominated Adama for the prestigious Caregiver of the Year award, submitting a detailed, anonymous testimonial that told the story of a caregiver whose compassion had saved a patient, not from a physical ailment, but from a spiritual despair. The story was so powerful, the committee was unanimous. Then, he arranged for 2 tickets to be sent to Mr. and Mrs. Malik Johnson. He knew from his sources that Isabel was desperate to attend, to network with the city's elite. He knew she would see it as the ultimate social victory. The trap, if you could call it that, was set. He told Adama he had a special event he wanted her to attend with him. He didn't tell her the details, only that it was important to him. He commissioned a designer, a young Ghanaian prodigy, to create a gown for her. When she saw the shimmering kente cloth, her breath caught in her throat. It was the fabric of queens. "It's too much," she whispered. "No," Elias said, taking her hand. "It is exactly who you are." The night of the gala, Adama felt a tremor of her old insecurity. As their car pulled up to the Astoria, past the flashing cameras and the crowds of onlookers, she felt like an imposter. But then Elias looked at her, his eyes full of adoration. "You are the most beautiful woman here," he said, "because your beauty isn't just on your skin. It shines from the inside out." She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and walked in beside him, not as a caregiver, but as his queen. They made their entrance, and the room, full of New York's most powerful people, buzzed with speculation. Who was this stunning, unknown woman on the arm of the mythical Elias Vance? Adama handled the stairs with a quiet grace that only made her more intriguing. From across the room, she saw them, Malik and Isabel. Malik's jaw was slack with shock. Isabel's face was a storm of confusion, envy, and dawning horror. For a moment, Adama's heart clenched with the memory of past pain. But then she looked at Elias, at the love in his eyes, and she felt nothing but a quiet peace. That part of her life was over. The ceremony began. Speeches were made. Awards were given. Then the host came to the final, most prestigious award of the night, the Caregiver of the Year. "This year's recipient," the host announced, her voice resonating through the hall, "was chosen for an act of profound and selfless humanity. Her anonymous nomination tells the story of a patient who had given up on the world and a caregiver who, through simple, consistent kindness, brought him back to life." Adama listened, moved by the story, having no idea it was her own. "And to present this very special award," the host continued, "we have a surprise guest, a man whose own work has changed the world, the founder and CEO of Vance Industries. Please welcome Mr. Elias Vance." A wave of gasps and whispers rippled through the crowd as Elias stood up from their table and walked toward the stage. He moved with the easy confidence of a man completely in his element. He took the microphone, and the room fell into that heavy, profound silence. "Good evening," he began. "I'm not much for public speaking. I prefer to let my work speak for itself. But tonight, I have to tell a story." He didn't talk about business or philanthropy. He told the story of a rich, foolish man who had lost his faith in humanity. He described the man's plan to disguise himself as someone poor and broken. He spoke of the coldness and professional pity he had encountered. And then his voice softened. "And then," he said, "a woman came into his life, a caregiver. She was paid very little. She was treated poorly by her colleagues, and the man she was assigned to was difficult. He was silent. He was a burden." At table 17, Isabel felt a cold dread creeping up her spine. The broken mule. "One day," Elias continued, his gaze sweeping the room, "the man's electric wheelchair broke. It was a hot day, and this woman had to push his heavy, manual chair a very long way. She never complained. Her uniform was soaked through with sweat, but she smiled and pointed out butterflies to the silent man. She hummed a song from her homeland. She showed him more grace in that 1 hour walk than he had seen in the last 10 years of his life. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. That woman didn't just push a wheelchair. She carried the entire weight of a man's broken spirit and never once buckled. She reminded him that strength is not about how much you can acquire, but how much you can give. He looked directly at his table, his eyes finding Adama's. Her own eyes were wide, glistening with tears of dawning realization. The recipient of the Heart of Gold Award for Caregiver of the Year, Elias announced, his voice ringing with pride, is Miss Adama Diop. The spotlight swung and found Adama. The room erupted in a standing ovation. Dazed, she made her way to the stage, moving as if in a dream. She saw Malik's ashen face, Isabel's look of utter devastation. But they were small and far away, figures in a story that was no longer hers. She reached the stage. Elias handed her the heavy glass award. He didn't let go of her hand. He leaned into the microphone, his next words intended for the entire world. My father told me that a woman's character is not in her words when you are powerful, but in her hands when you are weak, he said, his voice cracking with emotion. Adama, your hands didn't just push my chair. They rebuilt my world. This award is nothing. A piece of glass. I want to offer you my whole life. And then, to the utter astonishment of everyone present, the billionaire got down on one knee. He opened a small velvet box to reveal a diamond that seemed to hold all the light in the room. Will you marry me? Isabel didn't just faint. It was a dramatic, theatrical collapse, a heap of shattered pride and Chanel on the floor. Malik just sat there, frozen, a man staring at the ghost of the winning lottery ticket he had torn up and thrown away. Adama looked down at the love of her life, and with the entire world as her witness, she gave him her answer. Yes, she whispered into the microphone. Yes. The applause was deafening. It was the sound of a perfect ending, which was, of course, a perfect beginning. In the aftermath of the gala, the world realigned itself around the new reality. Adama and Elias's story became a global sensation, a modern-day fairy tale that people desperately wanted to believe in. But for them, it was just life. They married not in a splashy society wedding, but in a beautiful, intimate ceremony in her home village in Senegal, surrounded by the shade of baobab trees and the joyous sounds of her family. Elias, in traditional Ghanaian attire, looked more at home there than he ever had in a boardroom. Adama did not fade into the background as a billionaire's wife. She blossomed. With Elias's full support, she launched her fashion line, Diop, to international acclaim. Her designs, which celebrated African heritage with modern elegance, were hailed as revolutionary. But her true passion was the foundation they started together, the Diop Vance Foundation. Her name came first, at Elias's insistence. Their mission was twofold: to provide scholarships and startup capital for immigrant women, and to create programs that supported and honored frontline healthcare workers, especially caregivers. Adama poured her heart into it, using her platform to advocate for the forgotten women, the donkeys, whose quiet strength held up the world. She was no longer just carrying burdens, she was lifting others up. The consequences for Isabel were swift and brutal. The story of her cruelty towards both Adama and the disguised Elias Vance went viral. The Donkey and the Billionaire became a headline. Serenity Hills, facing a PR nightmare, fired her immediately for unprofessional conduct and a breach of patient ethics. The high society circles she had worked so hard to penetrate slammed their doors in her face. She was a pariah, a living embodiment of superficiality and cruelty. Her gazelle status had been revoked. Malik found himself tied to her sinking ship. His business associates, wary of his poor judgment and character, began to distance themselves. He tried desperately to contact Adama, sending long, rambling emails full of hollow apologies and pleas for a second chance. They were all intercepted and deleted by Elias's security team. Adama never saw them. She didn't need to. Malik was left with the life he had chosen, with the sophisticated woman who was now a social leper. One evening, he saw Adama on a news program dedicating the new Adama Diop Center for Caregiver Excellence. She was poised, eloquent, and radiant with purpose. He looked at Isabel, who was bitterly complaining about a broken nail, and he felt the full, crushing weight of his monumental mistake. He hadn't just lost a wife, he had lost his soul. Months later, Adama was doing a surprise site visit at a low-income nursing home that her foundation was considering for a major grant. As she toured the facility, she was led by the floor supervisor, a woman with tired eyes and hair pulled back in a severe bun. The woman kept her head down, her voice a monotone. As they rounded a corner, the woman looked up, and her eyes met Adama's. It was Isabel. She was thinner, her expensive clothes replaced by a cheap, ill-fitting uniform. The cosmetic polish had worn away, revealing someone brittle and lost. A flash of panic, then shame, crossed Isabel's face. She expected to be fired, to be humiliated, but Adama simply smiled, a small, gentle smile. "Thank you for the tour, Isabel," she said, her voice calm and professional. "You run a tight ship. The residents seem well cared for." She didn't mention the past. She didn't gloat. She just treated her with the same professional dignity she offered to everyone. That quiet act of grace was more devastating to Isabel's pride than any public rebuke could have been. As Adama walked away, Isabel stood frozen in the hallway, and for the first time in her life, she felt a flicker of something other than envy or bitterness. It was a tiny, unfamiliar seed of humility. True wealth, you see, is not what you have in your bank account, but what you have in your heart. Character is the only currency that never loses its value. It cannot be bought, sold, or faked for long. In the end, a person is not defined by the burdens they are asked to carry, but by the grace with which they carry them. Adama was never a donkey. She was, and always had been, a queen who had simply been waiting for someone with eyes clear enough to see her crown. If this story moved your heart, subscribe and hit that notification bell, because every tale has a lesson, and Alfred's Folk Tales never forgets.